Tales of Thorinis, Chapter 6, The Light That Blinds. The wind whispered through the trees, the leaves softly rustling as if sharing secrets. Every so often, a bird's chirp would blend seamlessly with the soundscape, masking Favi's careful, measured steps. He moved like a shadow through the dense underbrush, bow clenched tightly in his hand, his movements fluid and precise like a predator seeking out its prey. His thoughts drifted bitterly to the past. Join the guard. What else must I endure to bring you back, dear Svinneron? The words echoed in his mind as a grim smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Join the ranks of the army that's been butchering my people for as long as I can remember. What a cruel twist of fate. He felt his strength waning with each day, the once snug armor now hanging loose on his dwindling frame, a shell that barely clung to his thinning body. If only there were another way. Steal it? And then what? Run like a coward, dying alone in these cursed woods? No, that's not what the stars have planned for me. I can feel it, he reassured himself, scanning the undergrowth with his sharp, unyielding gaze. He prowled forward, the brush parting under his presence, eyes glinting with a hunger that went beyond the hunt. Gotcha, he breathed, his voice barely a whisper, as he spotted his quarry, a small pack of wolves. One of them was still licking its wounds from an arrow he had loosed days earlier. The scene brought a faint satisfaction to his lips. Perfect. His fingers curled around the bowstring, pulling it back slowly, deliberately, with a patience that matched the forest itself. The tension in the air matched the tension in the string, so silent that even the most alert deer wouldn't catch a hint of it. In a heartbeat, the arrow flew, slicing through the air and finding its mark, dropping the healthy wolf before the rest even knew what was happening. The pack bolted, a blur of fur and panic, disappearing into the depths of the woods before he could draw another arrow. But not all. One remained, the limping wolf injured from their last encounter, struggling to keep pace with the others. Its uneven gait betrayed its weakness, marking it as the one he needed. This wounded creature is my ticket, he thought, a grim resolve hardening in his chest. Bosper will pay well for the carcass, and the coin will be enough to grease the palms of those guards. Everything is starting to fall into place. All that's left is to catch this crippled mutt. He moved with renewed focus, his eyes fixed on the struggling beast, each step calculated as he closed in on his prey. Gold coins spilled across the worn wooden table, glinting in the dim light of the tavern's back room. Casca watched them with a satisfied smirk, leaning back in her chair. Well done, Nyx. Stealing a goblet from the upper city and not a single rumor making the rounds. I have to admit, I'm impressed. Her voice carried a hint of amusement as she studied him. Nyx lounged across from her, his legs casually thrown over the table, spinning a gold bracelet around his finger with a cocky grin. What can I say, Casca? I've got a knack for this sort of thing, he replied, his voice dripping with pride. Casca's smirk deepened as she drew on her gilded pipe, the sweet-smelling smoke curling into the air between them. Well, dear Nyx, it looks like your initiation stage is just about over. Now, you get a chance to really prove your loyalty to us. A simple task, and a quick one at that. She exhaled a long stream of smoke, her eyes gleaming through the haze. Nyx leaned in slightly, catching the change in her tone. I'm listening, he replied, though his mind was already racing, trying to read between the lines of her sudden shift in demeanor. Casca's smiles grew sharper as she continued. Here's the deal. One of our own missed a very important payment. The kid thinks he can use our contacts and then keep all the loot for himself. I'd like you to remind him politely that this isn't how we do things, understand? Nix's grin faded, his eyes narrowing as he studied Casca's pale face, searching for any hint of hidden intentions. Her expression was as cool and composed as ever. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I understand. Consider it done." With that, he pushed himself off the table, pocketed the sketch of the delinquent's face Casca had handed him, and strode toward the creaky old stairs that led to the surface. The tavern's back room gave way to the dim, smoky lobby of the public bedrooms, where the air was thick with the smell of sweat and cheap pipe smoke. As Nick stepped through, the receptionist behind the chipped wooden counter gave him a sideways look. She was a wiry woman, her sharp eyes hidden behind a veil of boredom. Nix pulled out the folded paper from his pocket, revealing a hastily drawn portrait of a man with a distinctive bow-tie-shaped scar on his right cheek. Scrawled beside the sketch in red ink were the words, "Overdue fee," and a curt, scrawled negation. He quickly tucked the paper away, but not before the receptionist caught a glimpse of it. She took a slow drag from her thin pipe, a mocking smile curling her lips. "Good luck, newbie. First real assignment, and they've already got you knocking on someone's door," she taunted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Nix's patience snapped. He felt the anxiety creeping up his spine, pressing against his usual bravado. "What the fuck are you on about?" he shot back, his voice rising. "Why's everyone making a damn fuss about a debt collection? What am I supposed to do, kill the guy or something?" The receptionist's smile softened, becoming almost patronizing, and she let out a low, knowing chuckle before turning back to her ledger, dismissing him without another word. Her silence was more unsettling than any threat. It hit Nix like a punch to the gut. He suddenly saw through the veneer of secrecy that surrounded Casca and her crew. This wasn't just about lifting trinkets from rich pockets or sneaking away with a bit of silver. The real money here wasn't in simple heists. It was in blood. And now, he realized, that blood was going to be on his hands. The square sprawled out wide before him, a serene expanse marked by neatly divided fields where rows of crops mingled with patches of grazing sheep. Novices moved between the rows, their hands busy tending to the earth, while clusters of grapes glistened brightly under the midday sun, promising the richness of the coming harvest. Deus's gaze lingered on the scene, taking in the peaceful yet purposeful atmosphere of the monastery, a stark contrast to the tension that tightened in his chest. From beyond the fields, Deus felt the weight of a gaze upon him. A fire mage stood at attention near the grand gate that led into the heart of the monastery's main building. Clad in deep crimson robes, the mage's presence was unmistakable, a figure of authority that seemed to cast its own heat even from a distance. Deus swallowed hard, his steps faltering for a moment before he forced himself to continue forward. To paladins, even mages are to be respected, Deus reminded himself, and for someone like me, they are a power beyond measure. "Hello, Deus," came the mage's voice, calm and steady, cutting through the silence. The mage's tone was formal, yet there was a warmth there, a subtle curiosity. "We have been awaiting you with great impatience." "Me?" Deus stammered, his uncertainty slipping through before he could catch it. He met the mage's eyes, finding them unreadable, like embers flickering behind glass. "Yes, Deus. You." The mage's lips curved slightly, as if he found Deus's surprise amusing. "Every lost soul is welcome here, but you are of a particular kind, a special art. For every man has free will to follow the path that beckons to him. But you, as a warforge, are a creation of pure intent, crafted by the will of our Lord Innos, and of course, with the modest aid of our skilled mages. Those like you are special to us." Deus found himself at a loss for words, his mouth opening and closing without sound. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the mage's words, the implications of being special. Seeing his struggle, the mage's expression softened. He gestured toward the edge of the fields. "Perhaps we might walk a while," he suggested. They began to circle the monastery grounds, the mage's robes sweeping through the grass, while he spoke of the history and purpose of the place. He described how the building was a linchpin in the struggle for the island's magical energy, how the land brimmed with ancient power, rich in magical awe, and how only the Order of Fire, with its mages and the disciplined ranks of the paladins, could keep these energies from falling into darker hands. Deus listened intently, his mind shifting from his own nervous thoughts to the grander picture the mage painted. The island, with all its hidden veins of power, the monastery standing as a sentinel against the encroaching darkness. It was a vision that stirred something in his mechanical heart, a sense of a purpose he had yet to fully grasp. Yet, there was a nagging sense that the mage's words held another, more personal meaning, something tailored for him. As they walked, the mage's gaze turned more pointed, as though seeing through Deus's confusion to the heart of his uncertainty. He cleared his throat softly and added, "Becoming a mage does not happen overnight, Deus. One must cultivate discipline, learn the art of humility, and even begin as a mere servant within the guard. Such service shapes character, and in time, that character becomes a channel for magical power." Deus felt a flicker of interest stir within him, the idea catching hold before he even realized it. He hesitated, then blurted out the question that had been building inside him. "What if I wanted to become a paladin instead?" For the first time, the mage's composure wavered, a flicker of something, surprise, perhaps even discomfort, crossing his face. He parted his lips, seemingly searching for the right words, but whatever answer he had prepared was cut short by the abrupt echoing bang that rang out from the cathedral's entrance. The sound reverberated through the stone halls, sending flocks of birds scattering into the sky from the nearby trees. Both Deus and the mage turned sharply toward the source of the noise, the atmosphere shifting from contemplative to tense in an instant. Nyx's blow sent the delinquent sprawling onto the ground, the thud of his body muffled by the dirt beneath. A soft hiss accompanied the extension of Nyx's twin blades, the eerie metallic sound cutting through the air. The young man, now on his knees, trembled before him, his eyes wide with terror and his breath coming in ragged gasps. Panic twisted his features and desperation spilled out of him like a plea. "Please, I beg you, we can make a deal. We'll split the loot. Hell, you can even take my arm as proof. Just please don't kill me." His voice wavered, growing weaker with each word, until he was little more than a crumpled form clutching the dirt at Nyx's feet. For a brief moment, a flicker of sympathy passed across Nyx's face, a shadow of doubt that softened the hard edges of his resolve. But the weight of unseen eyes prickled at the back of his neck, reminding him that he was never truly alone, that he was likely being watched, even now. He clenched his jaw, banishing the hesitation, and lifted one blade towards the sky. The sunlight pierced through the lone lime tree above, catching on the polished steel and giving it a soft, ethereal glow. Nyx's mind wandered to the strangeness of it all. How such a beautiful thing, crafted with such skill, existed for a single brutal purpose. It was almost poetic, in a sick way. Without further pause, the blade descended. It sliced cleanly through the air, and a spray of red bloomed against the sunlit ground. As the steel bit through flesh, The blood that touched the edge sizzled, evaporating into a thin mist that rose and dissipated in the warm afternoon air. The sound it made, a sickly, sizzling hum, lingered in the silence, a grisly echo that seemed to hang between the two men. Nick stood over the lifeless form, staring down into the young man's face, frozen in a mask of terror. He could already tell that this image would cling to him, etched deep into the dark corners of his mind. The wide, empty eyes, the mouth caught mid-plea. These would haunt him long after this moment faded. Death was no stranger to Nix. As a Garantian spy, he had spilled blood time and time again in service to his kingdom. But this felt different. To kill for a few dirty coins, to silence a debtor rather than an enemy. It churned his stomach, made him want to claw the very skin off his hands to wash the feeling away. He forced himself to breathe, to regain his composure. With a practiced motion, he swung his blade, expecting to see droplets of blood scatter onto the ground. But the steel remained clean, the usual spatter absent. Instead, the blade had absorbed the blood like a sponge, the burgundy liquid drawn into the metal itself. Nix furrowed his brow, staring at the swords in his grip, their silver surfaces now pulsing faintly, as if the weapons themselves had a heartbeat. "What the hell are you?" Nix muttered under his breath, a chill running through him as he sheathed the swords. They slid back into their scabbards with a soft, satisfied click, as if they too had feasted on the blood they had taken. He cast a final glance at the corpse sprawled beneath the lime tree, then turned away, forcing his feet to move. He disappeared into the shadows of the slums, the narrow alleys swallowing him whole. The city around him bustled with the usual chaos, vendors shouting, beggars scuffling, and the occasional patrolling guard. To anyone watching, he was just another figure moving through the grime and poverty, a shadow among shadows. And as Nix walked deeper into the heart of the city, he wore the mask of indifference as best he could. But inside, he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something inside him had changed, like a thread had snapped and could never quite be tied back together. The strange hum of his blade still echoed faintly in his ears, a reminder of the blood they had taken and the dark road he had chosen to walk. Farvey's lungs felt like they were on fire as he tore through the dense underbrush, each breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest blurred around him in a rush of green and shadows, but his focus never wavered from the path of the wounded wolf, the trail of blood-slicked leaves leading him onward. The separation from his patron, Svineron, had already started its slow, corrosive work on his body, gnawing away at his muscles, leaching the strength he once took for granted. Now it was not just the burn in his legs he had to contend with, but a creeping sense that he was slowly, inexorably wasting away. Yet this chase, this desperate pursuit of wounded prey, was a rhythm he knew well, like a grim dance that had played out many times before. The wolf's whimpering cries reached his ears, mixed with the snapping of twigs and the rustling of leaves. He pushed through the thick underbrush, branches scraping against his cheeks and arms, urging him forward like an unseen hand. But something else clung to the air, something acrid that made his nose wrinkle. A sharp, pungent smell that he tried to ignore, even as it gnawed at the edges of his senses. He pushed the thought down, focusing instead on the blood-slicked trail ahead. But the familiarity of the stench stirred a faint unease in his chest. His heart thudded faster, not just from exertion, but from the unsettling sense that he should recognize this scent like an old memory slipping just out of reach. The forest began to thin, and the canopy overhead parted to reveal patches of sky. Farvey knew this stretch of terrain well. It sloped upward toward a rocky outcrop that overlooked a sheer drop. The cliff would mark the end of the chase, where the wolf would be cornered with nowhere left to flee. He clenched his jaw and pushed onward, knowing his quarry was running out of options. But the ground beneath his feet began to soften, sucking at his boots with each step, the earth turning from firm to treacherous. The pungent smell only grew stronger, thick in the air, like a suffocating fog. He cursed under his breath, struggling to keep his balance as he slogged through the slick mud, every step slowing him down. The wolf's silhouette appeared ahead, a shadow against the thinning trees, limping toward the edge of the forest. It was so close now, its fur matted with sweat and blood, each step more laborious than the last. Farvi's heart pounded harder. This was it, his last chance. His hands tightened around his bow, fingers brushing the nocked arrow as he drew back the string. Yet even as he readied himself, the smell clawed at his mind, demanding to be acknowledged. His stomach twisted with a sudden, inexplicable dread, like he was on the brink of discovering something he would rather remain hidden. Deus stepped into the temple, and the air seemed to shift around him, growing heavier with the ancient power embedded in every stone and carving. The sight that greeted him stole his breath. A vast hall, its ceiling soaring upward, supported not by columns of stone but by statues of paladins. Each figure was depicted as a mighty sentinel, holding aloft the canopy of the building, as if they themselves bore the weight of the order upon their marble shoulders. It was a tribute to their strength and unwavering duty, a reminder that the Order of Fire's legacy rested on their sacrifice. At the far end of the hall, 3 grand thrones loomed, occupied by the monastery's archmages, but even they paled in comparison to what stood behind them. Towering over the entire assembly was the statue of Innos, the god of fire and light. It was as if a piece of a mountain had been shaped into this likeness, a marvel of craftsmanship so precise that calling it the work of human hands seemed a sacrilege. Clad in robes of pure white marble that flowed like liquid stone, the statue held a massive, gleaming blade in its hands, a sword that could have split the temple itself with a single swing. Yet, rather than inspiring fear, the sight of it brought an overwhelming sense of peace, as though the weight of judgment came tempered with a promise of protection. Deus felt himself pulled forward, almost against his will, until he dropped to one knee before the god's effigy. He tilted his head, trying to meet the eyes of the stone figure, but as he did, his vision filled with blinding, pure white light. A warmth flooded his senses, unlike anything he had ever experienced. For the first time, he felt the sun's rays not as data input, but as a touch, like a gentle caress warming his metallic frame. It wrapped around his very being, suffusing his core with a sensation akin to being swaddled in thick fur on a bitter winter day. His thoughts unraveled, lost in the simple joy of this newfound sensation, and narrow streams of warfare. Diesel trickled from his eyes, the closest thing his war-forged form could manage to tears. So suddenly the euphoria was shattered by a voice, ancient and rasping, yet resonant with authority. It rolled through the vast chamber like a thunderclap, each word striking like the swing of a smith's hammer on an anvil.
Deus!
The light faded from his vision, but the warmth lingered, nestling deep within him. He blinked, startled, the afterglow of the experience still tingling in his limbs. He struggled to find his voice, the words tumbling out in a stammer.
Yes? Come forward,
commanded one of the archmages, his voice as unyielding as the stone that surrounded them. With a deep breath, Deus rose to his feet. Each step forward felt like a journey across miles, his boots clicking against the polished marble floor that seemed to pulse with the ancient energies of the monastery. He approached the 3 archmages, feeling their scrutiny like a weight pressing down on his shoulders. To the left sat Archmage Serpentes, the eldest among them, known for his unyielding devotion to the order. and his intolerance for any deviation from the sacred path. His sharp, steel-grey beard seemed as rigid as his demeanor, and his cold, assessing gaze made it clear that he saw every fault in Deus's form, as if he might reduce him to cinders with a single glance. To the right, Archmagus Ulthar had a different air about him. His face was gentler, lined with age, but softened by the many hours he spent helping novices in the gardens. There was a warmth in his eyes, an unspoken reassurance, as if he saw potential in Deus that even he did not yet understand. And at the center sat Archmagus Pyrokar, the tallest of the three, his presence commanding the space like a roaring fire that could warm or consume. Pyrokar rose slowly from his throne, each movement deliberate, his robes whispering across the stone floor as he stepped towards Deus. His voice, though calm, carried a gravity that made the air around him hum.
I have heard that you come to us for instruction.
Deus froze, panic flashing across his face. No, Archmagus of Fire, Pyrokar. I only came for... Pyrokar's hand lifted, silencing Deus's frantic words with a simple gesture. Calm, child, he intoned, his voice gentler now, like the embers of a dying flame. You are here because Innos has guided you, whether you realize it or not. Let me show you everything you seek, even that which you have yet to understand. Deus swallowed, a dozen questions clawing at the back of his mind, but the overwhelming presence of the Archmage and the remnants of warmth still radiating through him stayed his tongue. He found himself nodding, compelled to follow wherever this path might lead, feeling that somehow, in the light of this ancient place, he was on the edge of something vast and unknowable.